Hello, this is a voice created entirely with artificial intelligence. You're listening to the Your Morning Coffee podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Michael Etchart, weekly music news for the new music business. Take it away, guys.
From Gupta Media, TikTok myths versus facts.
From Billboard, the case for and against higher streaming subscription rates.
And from a CBC documentary, is the music industry being reshaped for the better or worse by tech companies? Well, that's an interesting thought, Jay. Well, I'll have to talk about that. So these stories, I should say, and more, Jay and I are going to wrap about today. Welcome. We're happy you're here. It's the Your Morning Coffee podcast, and we are going to press the button right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Well, happy Easter, Jay. Top of the morning to you. Good to see you.
It is Easter weekend. Happy Easter.
And I assume that's why you're wearing a bunny outfit, because it's Easter weekend.
Right. That's exactly
It's a good look.
I think it is. How about that intro? That really was created with artificial intelligence. It sounds like a real human being.
It sure does.
But I've been playing around with it because you and I have been talking so much about people who are creating songs, whether it's lyrics, whether it's music, whether it's kind of drawing from someone's body of work, like we talked with Chris Castle last week. So I was playing around with it, and I created this voice. And I used a platform called play.ht, but there's a lot of platforms out there where you can create things like this. But that was fun.
Amazing, actually. And I know some teacher friends that are using, because, obviously teachers and educators are worried about all this technology where a kid can just say, I want to write a 2,000 word term paper on Benjamin Franklin, and out it goes. Yeah. But I also know teachers that are using it to write lesson plans, saying, let me give me a 6th grade class lesson plan on the nitrogen cycle. And there it goes. So it's going to be interesting to see not only the tools that are needed to identify when it is used, but also the tools just how it will shape and improve, hopefully, our everyday lives and the things that we're using. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's in its infancy right now, but it is moving pretty quickly. And there is software out there now that's also getting better at analyzing things to see if they were made with artificial intelligence. Right, so it's going to be on both sides of that equation. I think our conversation last week with Chris Castle about artificial intelligence and music, if you haven't heard that, go back to that episode. It's really interesting how we thought that maybe the technology had gone so fast that the business and the rules and laws surrounding it maybe needed to catch up. But as Chris explains, that's not really the case.
And I would like to kind of talk to him further at some point about that, because the more I thought about it after we did the episode, actually, I'm thinking, man, but how do you identify like snippets of songs or even the like you, I think we were talking about like let's creating a song in the style of Nirvana. But that's also kind of the style of a number of other artists. And Nirvana, of course, came about by their influences. How do you really kind of pull apart all of those different influences in a potential AI created song? I mean, I understand that his point that the we actually have a lot of things in place to do that from a business standpoint. But on the creative side, it's like, wow, I could see that actually being pretty hard, but we'll see. I mean, it's early days, and
it really
we'll
is.
Figure it out.
And some of the ways that they look at this is if you're drawing, you use the Nirvana example. If they're drawing from Nirvana's body of work, then that will be maybe a little bit easier for them to determine that was the case. It may be harder when it's multiple artists or a genre or mood. So my head's just spinning. We'll just have to follow this closely because it's definitely going to affect this music industry in a big way. And speaking go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. I was going to say, and I think we're both going to be at NAMM this week, aren't we? The NAMM show, which is the big. Oh, you're not going. But it's going to be, I'm going to be there, and I'm already getting invitations to come and go to certain booths with a lot of music creation AI tools, and I can hardly wait to see what's out there and what's coming, and I'm sure it's just going to be crazy, unbelievably crazy.
Yeah, so you'll have to report back what you see. I was supposed to be doing a panel with Mike Brandvold at NAMM, but I got an opportunity to go to Nashville and participate in this really cool event, which we'll cover more in depth later. But I won't be able to go, unfortunately. But I did want to mention that I'm really excited for Record Store Day. It's less than 2 weeks away. Yeah. It's April 22nd. And I had a chance to talk to the co-founder, Michael Kurtz, this last week. But tell us a little bit about, before we jump into that, Mike, tell us a little bit about Record Store Day.
Oh, my goodness. Well, Record Store Day, of course, it's an annual event launched back in 2007, held on one Saturday every April and then every Black Friday in November to celebrate the culture of the independently owned record store. Record Store Day brings together fans, artists, and thousands of independent record stores around the world, and it is such a fantastic event, and God bless him for building this thing to what it is now. And it's and I'm sure he's got people just, clamoring to be involved. And what a fantastic event, again, that's turned into a lot of hard work to lift it and get it off the ground. But boy, it is just something that we all look forward to. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. So like I said, I had a chance to talk to Michael this past week to really find out what we can expect and then talk about the timeline a little bit if you're an artist or manager and you'd like to participate in the Black Friday Record Store Day. So let's let that conversation roll. Michael, thanks so much for joining me. Record Store Day is coming soon, April 22nd. What can we expect?
I think this year's going to be probably the biggest Record Store Day we've ever done for many reasons. A lot of it has to do with the fact we started working with younger artists about 8 or 10 years ago and moved away from just the iconic classic artists exclusively that we were doing. And the best example of that is the Taylor Swift Long Pond Sessions album that's coming out. It's the largest production we've ever done of a record. It's 115,000 worldwide.
Wow.
About 75,000 of that would be in the U.S. So what it means is that we're going to have a lot of young people lined up along with everybody else. I mean, it's been trending that way anyway. Record Store Day, as of about 3 or 4 years ago, is slightly more female than male. The average age of a person going to Record Store Day has dropped to about 28 from around 62 when we first started. Wow. Back in 2008 when we pretty much single-handedly relaunched the vinyl business by ourselves because no one else would do it. And we made. So what's going to happen is you're going to have all the Swiftie fans come, and a lot of them come to Record Store Day anyway. But now we're going to have an army of them, and that means that the lines will probably be pretty long in the morning. But the good news is this year's selection of Record Store Day titles is the best we've ever done. I mean, I'm just stunned by it. And when I talk to record store owners, they are too. And it's really, it's just a bounty of goodness. But how do you deal with that many incredible albums coming out on one day? It's about 325 total. And of them, they're just, you can just go down the list, whether you're into, classic iconic artists, or newer artists, or jazz, or country, or R&B and hip hop. It's all there. It's a pretty amazing list.
Looking forward to it.
So it's going to be a very exciting day.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite days of the year. Okay, so the next Record Store Day after April 22nd is a big one, and that's Black Friday 2023. For those that don't know, Black Friday, that's the day after Thanksgiving. Can you kind of walk us through the timeline for those that want to submit music for consideration? Talk a little bit about that timeline.
Well, a lot of it's internal, it's the music industry stuff. These are timelines or dates that we give to artist managers, labels, distributors, or whatnot, so everybody can prepare for it. But the first date that comes up is right after Record Store Day, when we asked everybody who wants to participate to submit their titles. And we have a team of about 15 record store owners that goes through everything that is submitted to us. And so everything that ends up being released on a Record Store Day event is something record store owners want. A lot of times people don't go, why did you pick like this oddball, record? Yeah. And it's like, well, that's because record store owners wanted that record. But anyway, so May 2nd is when everybody turns in all their titles. We're pretty cool about people who come in a little bit later, but that's our goal. And then we go through a process of proving everything, and that is done by June 1st. And then everybody moves into production if they haven't already. A lot of people go into production early because things have gotten better since COVID, where the production timeline stretched out to almost 6 months. Now it's, somewhere between 3 and 4 months, depending on who's producing it. So it's pretty much back to normal, the way it's always been. So June 1st is when everything goes into production. And then we asked everybody to provide every detail and artwork and everything so we can start building the infrastructure, the website, the listings, everything we use to communicate and educate people on Record Store Day titles. That's turned in by July 1st. And then the stores themselves will start soliciting orders. The distributors, we have 3 Record Store Day distributors, Alliance, AMS, and Ingram, and they start soliciting the orders from the stores on the 23rd and then of October. And then Record Store Day is Black Friday this year, so November 24th. And that's when the big day is. And everything goes on sale and the celebrations start.
I can't wait, Michael. Congratulations on all that you've accomplished so far. Can't wait for these Record Store Days. We encourage everybody to get out there, support their local record store. And it sounds like it's an embarrassment of riches this year. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
There you have it.
You can imagine how much work that is to get it up and running and to continue with the great work they're doing. But man, it's, again, I tip my hat to everything they do.
Yeah, so many great releases, lots of exclusive vinyl. So again, Record Store Day, is coming up April 22nd, and then the next one will be Black Friday, which of course is a day after Thanksgiving. So that's November 24th. And we will see you there. I can't wait.
Absolutely. And as you probably know, Jake, I think we exchanged kind of texts about that. We lost a giant in the business this last week.
Icon. Absolutely.
Seymour Stein, the founder of Sire Records. And, having worked in the Warner family, we talk a lot about, of course, and specifically Warner Brothers Records and the success they had certainly on an A&R side of things back in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s. And so much of that was Seymour Stein on the Sire label. It's unbelievable. The Pretenders, The Cure, Echo and the Bunnymen, all these kind of new wave acts. And what we're listening to in the background actually is a song called Hocus Pocus by the band Focus, which was a hit in the U.S., a strange hit indeed, back in '73, and that was something that he licensed, and that's what Seymour did a lot of. Is he would spend a lot of time in the UK, and things that were just bubbling under, he would sign. And when you look at all that success Warner Brothers Records had in the '70s and '80s, I mean, much of it was Sire Records, and unbelievable, of course, Madonna and. It's such an eclectic collection of artists. But boy, he much to be proud of. And there's a funny line. He worked under Sid Nathan, the crazy guy who ran King Records. And when he wanted Seymour to come to work for him, Seymour's dad was very skeptical about that. But Sid Nathan said, "Your son has shellac in his veins. Your son is good for one thing and one thing only, and that's being in the record business. If you don't let him in the music business, he will wind up delivering newspapers for the rest of your life. If you don't want that on your conscience, you will let him come with me for the summer." He was an intern at King Records, which of course had James Brown and stuff like that on labor. So anyway, a real, sort of the quintessential record man.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Boy, yeah, what a loss. What a loss. But what wonderful contributions.
Yeah, true legend.
Yeah, so I got to tell you, Jay, I've been following your Behind the Set List podcast with our good friend Glenn
thank you, brother.
Peoples. You guys, you just keep getting fantastic artists on that. I mean, I don't know how it happens, but boy, it's much to be. What do you have coming up next? I think I know, but I'm going to ask you to tell me to make sure.
Well, thank you. It's been such a joy to do. Glenn is a great guy, a dear friend, and we talk about him. In fact, we're covering one of his stories this week on the podcast. We've got a couple coming up that I'm pretty excited about. We have Joe Bonamassa, who is just an amazing guitar player. I wish we could do an episode just talking about his guitar collection, right?
Oh, yeah. Yes,
but,
we could.
Just a great conversation. So watch that. That should be coming out in the next week or so. But I'm really excited. We recorded a conversation with Shania Twain a couple of days ago, and it was just magic. Check out, there's a Netflix documentary out called Not Just a Girl, and it talks about her rise to fame and how she just overcame adversity. And, the harder I work, the luckier I get. That's what I learned, from watching her. Her parents tragically died in a car crash, when she was very young, like maybe 20, 22 years old. She had to take care of her siblings. She, at one point got bitten by a tick and got Lyme disease and lost her voice and had health issues. And, Mutt Lange, she married him, but at some point he left her for her best friend, which sounds like a bad country music song, but just an incredible, incredible career.
Yeah, I have not seen the documentary. I have it on my list of things I want to watch. And she's been kind of away for a while, and she's really back. I think she's got a big tour coming up and did a Vegas residency.
World tour.
So she's
right.
World tour, yeah. So, and you forget how huge she was in that period of time. I mean, I think you told me like that one record, 16 songs on the record, 12 were singles and hit singles at that. I mean, that's remarkable. And she was one of those artists that really sort of country artists that just crossed over into the mainstream in a huge way.
She crossed over to pop. Yeah. Yep. And she eventually teamed up with Bruce Springsteen's manager and basically said, look, I want to do a worldwide tour. I want to cross over to pop. And she did. And she did it her way, so to speak. And she was definitely a trailblazer in a lot of ways. And it was just a wonderful conversation. So probably a couple weeks before we drop that one. But Just an amazing conversation with Shania Twain. Thanks for bringing it up.
Looking forward to that for sure. And now you sent me I'll let you kind of tell me where it came from, but a really interesting link to a YouTube video.
Yeah, my friend Jess Ruggles sent me this 9-minute video on YouTube, and it's called The Jimi Hendrix Experience. I Was There, Hendrix at LA Forum by Billy Gibbons. Yes, that Billy Gibbons. And that was about a show at the LA Forum, April 26th, 1969. And first of all, it's just a wonderfully created video. The animations are really interesting, but it's Billy Gibbons' narration, his storytelling about hanging out with Hendrix and talking with him and seeing the show and how special that show was. I just thought it was magic.
Oh yeah, and he's such a raconteur. I mean, he's got a gift for telling stories, and he was there, and his first band, Moving Sidewalks, did some opening slots for Hendrix when they were in that neck of the woods, kind of in Texas and in the South, and so he knew him. And to hear first person stories of somebody who knew Hendrix is just really cool, and the way that he delivers and everything is really great. So
Jimmy he was like us. He was a music freak. He was always buying records, and he made it so when he was touring that every hotel had to put a record player in the room, and he would play records, and he and Billy would listen to things. And Billy makes this comment about, Jimmy asked him, how does this guy, how are they doing this? And Billy just turned it around and said, they're probably listening to your records going, how is he doing this? And
Exactly.
It really gave us some insights as to the man who Jimmy was, and just about the band and how they performed and him as a person. It was really good. Anyway, it's called The Jimi Hendrix Experience. I Was There, Hendrix at the LA Forum by Billy Gibbons. Check it out on YouTube. It's really good.
It's really cool. And we will have a link in the notes so you can find that very, very easily. And really cool. And I've actually got to spend some time one time with Billy, and he just talks like that the whole time. And whatever he says, he can give you directions to the restroom, and it just sounds great.
It
wow.
It really does. He's got that gift. It's almost that Billy Bob Thornton kind of shucks, but it's really good. Before we jump into the stories, I was reading The Ledger, which is a newsletter we talk about. Glenn Peoples does it from Billboard, comes out every Friday. And it's really interesting because he's talking about, that global recorded music is kind of slowed down, right? It's single-digit growth. And that these DSPs are going to have to work harder to attract new customers and keep the ones they already have. And one of the things he points out in the newsletter, which I think is so important, is, one of the ways that they're going to find more growth is probably one of the least appealing facets of digital music, and that's metadata. And we throw that term around a lot, metadata.
We do. It's super important. And if you don't know, metadata is information attached to data that describes it. In the case of music, it includes the names of artists, tracks, year of release, genre, producer, etc. Although it lacks sex appeal, to say the least, metadata is as crucial to a streaming service as the unsung cast and crew members of a Hollywood blockbuster. The stars get the attention, but the movie suffers if everybody else performs poorly. Bad metadata, an album incorrectly listed under the wrong artist, for example, can carry financial implications too. There's a direct line between user experience, customer retention, and a service's ability to raise prices.
Yeah. And we're
Super
finding
important.
this. Yeah, we're finding this a lot in our business where, let's say we go into Sound Exchange and look to make sure that our artists are in there properly, things are spelled properly, because as Glenn points out, and you just said, there are financial implications to having bad metadata. And so word to the wise, make sure that you're checking all of your metadata and make sure not just the artist, title, version, tracks, publishing splits, those things, but everything to sidemen, to anything that describes that particular song. make sure it's correct, because it makes a big difference.
And of course, in the years of vinyl, the metadata was all there. It's like, who played
Right.
drums on this song? You flip over the album cover, and it usually said who played drums on that song. And those are things that I want to listen. I want to know, because we all have had that experience where you're listening to something, you're like, oh my God, that's fill in the blanks. That's a great sound. That's a great guitar solo. That's a great this or that.
Yeah.
And who wrote that? Who engineered
Who played
it, who
on that?
mastered it,
Yeah.
who played on it. All those things
Yeah.
are so important. That's what I want to know when I'm listening to music, and that's what pulls me in. And I assume that's a lot of people's experiences. It's like,
Yeah,
I
and we're going to
wanna know
talk about
stuff.
that a little bit more in our third story today, about some of the things that are missing from the streaming world, and that's definitely part of it. As we get going here, one of the biggest stories we've been covering for months now is what's going on with TikTok, whether it's helping to, discover artists, to make, catalog artists more successful, like we saw with Fleetwood Mac. And then lately it's been the government threatening to shut it down. And there's been a lot of misinformation out there. And our friends over at Gupta Media posted an article called TikTok Myths versus Facts. And I would love to go through some of these myths and what the facts are behind them. So just to kick it off, in response to the recent congressional hearing, the TikTok communications team has been addressing inaccuracies with facts head on. We connected with our partners at TikTok to answer 10 myths that have been circulating around the U.S. and clarify with corrected information.
Yeah, interesting. So I'll take the first one. The first one is, the myth is TikTok's parent company ByteDance Limited is Chinese owned. And they say in this, the fact is that TikTok's parent company ByteDance was founded by Chinese entrepreneurs, but today roughly 60% of the company is beneficially owned by global institutional investors. 20% is owned by ByteDance employees around the world, including nearly 7,000 Americans. And 20% is owned by the company's founder, who is a private individual and is not part of any state or government entity.
Okay, the second myth, decisions about TikTok are made in Beijing. TikTok, which is not available in mainland China, has established Los Angeles and Singapore as headquarters to meet its business needs. TikTok's CEO, Xiao Chu, is based in Singapore and oversees all key day-to-day and strategic decision-making when it comes to TikTok. TikTok's senior leadership, that team is based in Singapore, the United States, and Ireland.
Right. Another myth is TikTok manipulates content in a way that benefits the Chinese government or harms American interests. They say the fact is that TikTok is an entertainment app. The content on TikTok is generated by our community. TikTok does not permit any government to influence or change its recommendation model.
The next myth, ByteDance, the parent company, censors TikTok content on behalf of the CCP or Chinese government. Well, the fact is there are no TikTok content moderators in China. Content moderation on TikTok is overseen by the U.S. and Ireland-led Trust and Safety Team. All content is moderated based only on publicly available community guidelines, which are also developed by the Trust and Safety Team. Regardless of how content is flagged to TikTok, no content is removed without going through an established moderation process. TikTok does not remove content on behalf of any government, except in compliance with legal processes for content that violates local law.
This next one is interesting. The myth, of course, is TikTok stores U.S. User data in China where multiple Chinese nationals have access to it. Now, they say the fact is 100% of traffic in the United States is routed to Oracle. Access to that environment is managed exclusively by TikTok U.S. Data Security, a team led by Americans in America. TikTok has begun the process of deleting historic protected user data in non-Oracle servers. Once that process is complete, it will effectively end all access to protected U.S. user data outside of TikTok USDS, that's their TikTok US data security. It will effectively end all access to protected user data outside of TikTok USDS except under limited circumstances. Very interesting.
Right. Yeah, the next myth. The Chinese government can compel ByteDance to share U.S. TikTok user data. The fact, TikTok Incorporated, which offers TikTok app in the U.S., is incorporated in California and Delaware and is subject to U.S. laws and regulations governing privacy and data security. Under Project Texas, all protected U.S. data will be stored exclusively in the U.S. and under the control of the U.S.-led security team.
Right, another one here. TikTok collects a significant amount of sensitive data on its users. That's the myth. That's the myth. The fact is TikTok's privacy policy fully describes the data collected, which helps the app function, operate securely, and improve the user experience. The current versions of the TikTok app do not monitor keystrokes, collect GPS location in the U.S., or use face or voice prints to identify individuals.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about all of these myths and facts is something we touched on last week, and that is that when you're reading about Congress, they want to potentially shut it down. But what I noticed is a lot of the people that wanted to shut it down were either misinformed or they had never used the app before.
Right.
They didn't even know how it worked. And I feel like if you're going to be in Congress and voting on something that affects people's businesses and their lives, that you should do a little research and have your facts straight. And you would hope that. But I think politically, it's an easy thing to kind of jump on that bandwagon. Oh, it's the Chinese. It's bad, and they're going to have our data, and they could brainwash us, and the facts just don't bear that out. So I thought this was a really interesting piece.
It really is, yeah. And just like a lot of things, there's a lot of incorrect information floating around out there, and you just got to kind of collect the information as best you can to form a learned opinion. But you're right about that. It was clear in those hearings that a lot of those folks didn't know what they were talking about. So
No.
interesting. But hey, by the way, we should mention, Jay, the folks that help us put the show on every week.
Yes, we should.
Oh, my goodness. Couldn't do it without them.
Thank you for reminding me.
Of course, including our friends at Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
Yeah, we love Bands in Town. Over 74 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist services platform connecting over 560,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms.
Indeed. And big thanks to the Music Business Association. For more than 6 decades, the Music Biz Conference has been the point of origin for inspiration and collaboration in the music business. Join us for the Music Biz Conference in Nashville, May 15th through 18th. So
coming up.
Big thanks to it's coming up. It's going to be here just in a couple of weeks, actually. A few weeks. So big thanks to the Music Business Association, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, and Bands in Town. We certainly appreciate it. And by the way, I get to do this show every week with my good friend Jay Gilbert. If you don't know who he is by now, what the hell's the matter with you? We say this every week. But hey, my good friend Jay Gilbert, he is a music business consultant. He's the curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal, Sony, Warner Music Groups, and a little company called Fox Home Entertainment, a little startup company over there called Fox Home Entertainment.
Little internet startup. And this gentleman across from me is Michael Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, Warner Music Group, Capitol EMI, and Universal Music, where I first met him and worked with him and showed him my bootleg collection, and we had cheeseburgers, and that's how it all started.
And Jay likes milkshakes, by the way, but no whipped cream on the milkshake. No whipped cream or no cherry. Just the milkshake. Just the goodness of the milkshake.
I'm a purist.
Down with that.
You know that about me.
You are a purist. That's exactly right. At least when it comes to milkshakes. All right, Jay, how about if we jump into our second story? It's from our friends over at Billboard, the case for and against higher streaming subscription rates.
Yeah,
and as we've mentioned
Glenn
a number of
Peoples.
times. Yeah, Glenn Peoples on it. And of course, we've always talked about how our friends over at, let's say, HBO Max or Netflix, no thoughts whatsoever, no worries when they raise their rates. But for some reason, our friends in music streaming do not like to raise their rates in a way that the streaming video services clearly do.
Yeah,
So,
I feel that's changing. I feel like the tide is turning a little bit. And as Glenn points out, JP Morgan Chase analysts estimate that a Spotify rate increase for U.S. individual plans only would create incremental revenue annually of $200 million. So, with some of these markets, falling to single-digit recorded music revenue growth in 2022, there are rising expectations that Spotify will follow Apple Music and Amazon Music and raise the price of its individual plans in the U.S. and maybe even other markets.
So let's not forget, last year, growth in the U.S. music subscription revenue fell to 7.2%, down from 22% back in 2021. That was the lowest annual rate since the subscription market grew just 2.9% way back in 2010. That was a year before Spotify launched in the U.S. and transformed a business that depended on downloads to one ruled by streaming. And, as we talked about last week, I think, with subscriptions now accounting for 57.9% of U.S. recorded music revenue, overall revenue growth slowed to 6.1% from 23.2% the prior year.
Yeah,
Similar
and you know
scenes
what?
played
Those
out.
are
Yep.
those are good. I mean, those are good
Yes.
numbers. We've been spoiled by all these double-digit growth year over year over year. So when you see something like, oh, well, it's slowed 6.1%, you're like, wow, yeah, that is slower, but it's still growing.
Yes, exactly. So, it's, as they say in the article, the sudden slowdown could have a number of causes. Most markets stayed healthy in 2021 as the pandemic boosted all those music subscription services, but the increased competition and the attention economy, Jay. So as they say, TikTok is at least partially responsible for the softer growth. And this is referring to SNEP, which is France's record industry trade group.
Right.
And it says their 2022 annual report revealed that 77% of 16 to 24-year-olds say they discover a lot of new artists on TikTok. 45% of this group, now spend more time on the app, which is not monetized well, than on music services such as Spotify.
Yeah, I love that they point out, 77% of 16 to 24-year-olds, say they discover, quote, a lot of new artists on TikTok. Well, yeah, we've definitely seen that.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
He points out that, exactly. He points out that rising rates will create new revenue for rights holders. And also creators and, these digital services, just as growth is slowing in many major markets. So Barclays estimates that 10% price bump by all subscription services would increase earnings per share at Universal Music Group by 13% and add 400 million euros, which is about $430 million of revenue. So I guess what they're saying here is sort of obvious, that if you raise the rates, you're going to create more revenue. I think the challenge is going to be, where does that money go? Is it going to eventually benefit the songwriters, for example? And that's where I'd like to see some of these increases in revenue go.
Yeah. So there was a Morgan Stanley conference earlier in March, and Music Watch managing partner Russ Krupnick was talking about the first music subscription products. And you'll recall that was Rhapsody.
Yeah.
And back in 2003, Rhapsody cost $9.95 a month. Adjusted for inflation, that's equal to $16.25 today, 63% above what Spotify is charging, and 48% more than Amazon Music and Apple Music recently increased individual rates. So, we're talking, it's basically the same price as it was back in 2003 for Rhapsody today. And that's just unbelievable when you think about it. And
right. Yeah,
so
and it's the same
everything
price,
is undervalued.
But to your point, it's less, because if you adjust for inflation,
yes,
it's much less. Spotify, for its part, seems confident its product could withstand a broad price increase. So they said, we obviously know our competitors have raised prices, and we think we have a better product than most of our competitors. That was their CFO, Paul Vogel. He said that at that Morgan Stanley conference. So if our competitors are able to raise prices and we think we have the best product in the business, it obviously bodes well for our ability over time for pricing.
Right. But they also take a stance that keeping rates low in their mind is good for business. Back in earlier this year in January, Daniel Ek, of course, is the CEO, on an earnings call said that Spotify has two strategies to choose from. Grow the number of subscribers or increase the revenue per subscriber. He says, generally, our approach when we're early in a market is to try to grow the number of participants by maintaining a competitive price. Sure.
Yeah.
He said, over time, he added, more of the revenue growth comes from price increases as the market matures. But because it operates in 184 markets, Spotify doesn't have a single approach. In some markets, he said, we're mostly focused on growth.
And look, they've grown. They're a beast. They've got, so many subscribers, and they continue to grow. Spotify may have been fortunate, not to raise its standard plan prices in the wake of global supply chain problems, persistent inflation. Consumers are increasingly price sensitive. In the short term, Spotify could have bought itself some goodwill. And according to Mark Mulligan, he said it can make a case that it's helping consumers through a downturn. Over the long term, however, music subscription services' unwillingness to raise their rates could put them at a disadvantage to their video peers that you just mentioned.
Yeah, Mark said basically streaming music waited so long to change prices that a whole generation expects these prices. So it's an interesting kind of, I don't know if conundrum is the right word, but I'm pretty sure that they could bump up and add $2 to it and nobody would blink an eye. That's just my take on it. I think, we get used to the music services we have, and where we are far more, we don't think twice about canceling. Let's say we're not watching HBO this month. We'll cancel that, and maybe Netflix will keep, but maybe next month that changes. You can bounce around with video services based on what you're watching, but for music, it just seems like everybody's pretty content with staying with whomever they're with, barring any insane price differences.
Yeah, there isn't high churn, and I think part of that is that you get used to the interface and the platform, but also you create your own playlist typically. And yes, there is software out there to help you export and import your playlists, but I don't think the masses are going to go to that trouble. It's very affordable to have 100 million tracks at your fingertips. And I think the time is right. And like they pointed out before, there are other folks like Apple Music that have already raised rates. And it doesn't seem like anybody's throwing a fit.
Now, if you look into your crystal ball, Jay, which looks funny, by the way, with the crystal ball and the bunny suit that you're wearing today.
Yeah.
But if you're looking into the crystal ball, sure. What do you think's going to happen with prices with Spotify in the next, let's say, between now and this summer? Keep them the same or raise rates?
I think they're probably going to raise the rates. Maybe not that soon, because summer's coming pretty fast. We're already in April. But I do think that in the next year we'll see price increases.
Yeah, me too. Dramatic price increases or moderate?
No, I think they're gonna follow suit with Amazon and Apple and have modest increases. Look, eventually these things have to increase in price. like you said, adjusting for inflation. It's just that's ridiculously low. And I think if we're going to pay the rights holders and the songwriters a better share, or more money, I should say, that's going to have to come from increased rates as well.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
We will see what happens. And let's jump to our last story, Jay. This is from the CBC documentary. Is the music industry being reshaped for the better or worse by tech companies?
And this is different for us. Yeah, we don't typically review or talk about videos. It's usually about articles that were in your morning coffee. And I did post this video in your morning coffee. I thought it was really well done. Some really smart people are on it. You mentioned it was by the CBC. That's CBC Radio Canada. That's the Canadian Public Broadcast Service. And it features commentary by a lot of folks that we know and that we've covered in your morning coffee, like media journalist Tatiana Cirisano, British musician Tom Gray, American journalist Kalefa Sané, writer Stephen Witt, Canadian radio host Alan Cross, and author John Seabrook. A lot of smart and talented people, and they basically walk through sort of the history of how the music industry got to where it is. And they talk about a lot of issues that are currently being struggled with. And it's really interesting to hear smart people talking about what's gone on in the music industry and what's going on in the music industry.
Yeah, for sure. And, some of the things we're going to talk about certainly is on the sort of appliance side, if you will. And you and I were talking before we hit record this morning about, when we were in that advanced technology group over at Universal, that was something we paid a lot of attention to, which is how does the devices, how does that drive and change consumers' behavior and how does that affect everything in the music business? And a lot of companies were not paying attention to that. But you sent me a really interesting graphic that shows kind of, going back to all the way back to the late 70s. And you and I were talking about the Sony Walkman and how liberating that was back in the day. And it's hard to remember unless you're a certain age, what it was like, when you had to actually
tell our audience, not everybody knows what a Sony Walkman is. Okay. Tell them what it is.
It was a very small device that basically played a cassette tape, but it was about the size. I'm trying to think of it was relatively small. Yeah, well, a little bit bigger than that, but yeah, enough, something you could hold in your hand, and it had a clip, so you could put the clip on your belt, so you could put this on your belt, and it had very lightweight headphones on it, and oh my God, it changed everything. And I remember sitting and making tapes at home for my workout and for running, for jogging. And it just liberated is the only word I can think of. It's obviously we all have that ability now with all of our devices, but this was really the first one. And that was way back in 1979.
Yeah, it was first of its kind, really. Mm-hmm. And it was groundbreaking. Later, they had the Discman, we had MP3 players down the road, all of that stuff. But before the Walkman, you couldn't just get on your bike and ride around and listen to music. And it was absolutely a game changer, unless you wanted to hold up a big boombox or something like that.
That's right.
So,
which people did, certainly, of course.
Yes. The sub-headline is, "One tap and you can hear any song in the world, but who benefits?" CBC News looks at how Spotify, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, and TikTok are changing the very nature of music. And at the beginning of this documentary, Tatiana Cirisano from Media, she's very smart, very eloquent. She had this really great quote, and I know you caught this too. She said, "Why would you think that music is valuable? Value is driven by scarcity, and music isn't scarce at all." I thought that was like a really bold statement, and there's a lot of truth to it today. Yeah.
Well, and especially when we were kids and young people, you remember you had a finite amount of money, and you'd go into a record store, and half the debate with yourself was, okay, I've got enough for 2 records. But that's all the money I have. But there's like 9 records that I really want, and so you would sit there and agonize over that decision, and money was scarce. Your budget was low, and you
Right.
couldn't get everything you wanted. And that is the dramatic difference that my kids don't get. It's like music, all music is just there. It's just there. And that's not the way it was. And that's an interesting point by Tatiana, that it's like, yes, it is no longer scarce, therefore perhaps no longer valuable.
Not like it used to be, certainly. And they also talk about some of the, negative side of streaming. And I love that discussion. They talk about how, album art isn't the same as it used to be. You certainly don't have the size, of that vinyl album. And to your point earlier, you don't know who the sidemen were on it. You don't see all those liner notes and all of that. When you look at an album cover online, it's the size of a postage stamp. If you're looking like on your phone, they think that there's less engagement. And I think that's accurate when it comes to, and maybe even less fandom, because of the fact that you can listen literally for hours to streaming and maybe not even know who the artists were that you were listening to.
Yeah, exactly. They also, talk about, when a physical album or vinyl or CD, let's say, the rights holder or artist is paid a set amount regardless of whether the album is played once or 1,000 times. With streaming, needless to say, the rights holder or artist is only paid on consumption. We've moved to a mode of access over ownership, and that really has changed the game.
Yeah, it sure has. And I don't know if you knew this, but on TikTok, you're paid by creations. So when someone creates a video with your music in it, it's a whole different game. And Tatiana was talking about how it's a lot harder to even create a shared cultural experience, and she used the example of Michael Jackson's Thriller. There were certain things like, on the Motown anniversary show where he did the moonwalk for the first time or whatever. Yeah. We were all watching that. That was a shared cultural moment. And, there's dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of those kinds of moments that now are few and far between, because of this new streaming ecosystem.
Right. And we talked last week about, they use the figure 20% in here, but how much released music is never streamed. Forgotify.com, stuff. It's unbelievable how much music is uploaded every day, as we've talked about many times on the show. And yet so much of it just is never, ever streamed. And then even more of that is streamed maybe between 0 and 10 times. So it's so much music there, but a lot of it just is completely ignored.
Yeah, and they talk about that a lot in this documentary. And if you look at most DSPs have about the same music, give or take 100 million tracks, and it's growing as we talk about every day. But then you've got, SoundCloud, which has over 350 million. And I would be really curious because there's such a low barrier to entry to put your music up there. I would imagine that percentage of things that haven't been played once could be even higher. They also talk about how TikTok has really, really changed the business. And that's because fans they participate today. And if you think about that, when we were listening to our Sony Walkman, riding our bike around, listening to a cassette tape, we weren't participating. We were simply listening to, well, I guess you could say we participated in that we were curating our own playlist, right? We could take songs from different records and make our own mixtapes. And boy, that was my youth. So many of those, right? But today, it's more of our participation with that music where not only are you maybe, let's say, dancing to it on your TikTok or doing something to it, but you're actually manipulating the song itself. They talked about this Lady Gaga track that was sped up and it actually, it blew up. And we've talked about how things are reverbed or slowed down or sped up. You're actually manipulating the actual creation. So you're a participant now. And that's different than it's been in the past.
Very different. They also mentioned something that's really interesting, the age of algorithmic anxiety. And before we say what that is, we should also mention that, when we talk about an algorithm in mathematics, it's simply a set of steps used to perform a calculation, whether it's the formula for the area of a triangle or the lines of a complex proof. But when we talk about algorithms online, we're usually referring to what developers call recommender systems, which have been employed since the advent of personal computing to help users index and sort floods of digital content. So they refer to in this documentary about the age of algorithmic anxiety. Interacting online today means being besieged by system-generated recommendations. Do we want what the machines tell us to want? And that just lately has driven me crazy. For whatever reason, all these Google ads and stuff that are fed to me, I'm fed up. And so I totally related to this and the algorithmic anxiety, because I'm just tired of, you look something up and then you're fed that product and it's like, oh my God, please.
This is a little bit different in that, and it was Tatiana who brought this up, in that if you're, they mentioned that some young person was saying that, boy, this algorithm knows me better than I know myself. And, it's feeding her, these recommendations. And I can tell you from looking at my, let's say, Spotify, Release Radar, Discover Weekly, things like that, they're really good at discovery and rediscovery. But the point they're trying to make is, well, who's controlling that? And do they have biases? And they probably do in some way. And so that's that algorithmic anxiety she talks about is, do we want these algorithms, these machines to tell us what we should be listening to next? So there's pros and cons to that.
Yeah, without a doubt. But it's been kind of top of my mind lately. Interesting also that as they talk about the different kind of products, like we were talking a little bit ago about the different products, and we talked about the Walkman, and the Walkman back in '79 was $150. So
which doesn't sound like that much, but back then that would be like, as a kid, that was my week salary.
Yeah, that's $300 or $400 today for a device, and you forget how. Oh yeah, that's pretty crazy. But that's how much things cost back in those days, and of course, manufacturing processes have changed all that these days, and we can get stuff for dirt cheap. But when you wanted these devices, whether it was a Walkman or a Discman or all of these things, I remember the Diamond Rio. That was the first MP3 player that came out back in '98. That thing was super expensive at the time as well. Technically, it was the MP Man. The F10 came out before the Diamond Rio, but they were both in the same year. So it's you're right. They're basically they both came out in '98. But one thing I want to make sure we talk about is there was a lot of discussion in this documentary about blank tape, and I had kind of forgotten the uproar over. They called it piracy, and there was this whole campaign. You can Google it. Home taping is killing music. And they had commercials, and it was artists saying, basically don't do home taping. It's killing the music industry. And for me, it wasn't. I wouldn't borrow an album from you, tape it, and give you the album back. I use blank tapes to make my own mixtapes, and most people that I know did that. But I can see why they were up in arms that one person could buy a vinyl LP and run off several cassettes for friends. But I had forgotten what a big deal home taping was. Yes, it was a huge, huge deal. So things, through the years and how it's just a great documentary though. It's really worth watching and getting an eye. And like you kind of forget things, and to be reminded of certain things that happen along the kind of time continuum to where we are. In the music business and in the technology side of things. And here we are, Jay. It's 2023, and what an amazing story of how we got here.
Yeah, one of the things that they brought up, which seems obvious in hindsight, was when CDs came out, which I was working in a record store at the time. I remember it vividly. It was 1983, and we had a rack of CDs. But when those CDs, started to really sell and people were replacing their collections, we called that the salad days, right? But what they point out in this documentary that I thought was really interesting is that now music was digitized. Oops.
Right.
And because it was...
And by the way, we didn't know what that meant, though, at the time. Or
No.
I didn't know what that meant.
No,
Yeah.
no, we didn't until I was reading an article about, when CDs first came out, and it said something like, there's no wear and tear on the discs because light has no mass. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, how does this is like voodoo. This is witchcraft. How does this work? But then, they go through, and we won't go into all the detail, but they go into, how the MP3 came about and what happened when, that was basically brought to record companies and they dismissed it and didn't see the opportunity. And so now it was like this virus. So anyway, they go into everything from, what happened, when COVID hit and, the pro rata versus user centric, they talk about voice, with the Amazon Echo, the Google Nest, Apple HomePod, all of that stuff. But it's just a fantastic documentary. It's in your morning coffee. Check it out. I think it's maybe 45 minutes long, something like that, but it's definitely worth your time. It's a fantastic documentary.
It is absolutely fun to go back and reminisce. And I think one of the great, I'll leave with this line that that Tatiana mentioned in the documentary, which is, you forget when you were, let's say, even when you had a cassette or when you had albums, you knew exactly what you were playing and listening to. And she has a line in here where she says, it's easy for listeners to listen for hours without knowing who the artists are now. And in many ways, that's making it much more anonymous to what you're listening. And I do that all the time. You're just listening kind of casually, and suddenly you go like, oh, it's great. Who is this? And you got to go back and look, and you forget that back in those days it was much more active listening because you knew you put the stuff in, or you made that tape. You know what those artists were, and now it's really easy to not know who the artists are. And that's not
especially
good.
after that first dozen or so. The research has shown, it's easy for you to say, that after that first 12, 15 tracks, your engagement with it drops off. And it's more lean back, and you will miss, if you're listening to a playlist, for example, you may not know what those songs are, and they certainly don't back announce like, some radio stations do. So, yeah.
No. And for those of us like you and I both working with artists over the years, that's, that's the last thing you want. You want people to fall in love with your artists. And how do you do that when they're just anonymously, those records are being played? It's really hard stuff. But anyway, good art, a great documentary, worth your time to watch it. So we encourage you to do so. And we got to wrap up the show. So we do want to say, if you enjoy our show, because we sure appreciate you listening in, please tell a friend.
Just tell one.
I would certainly appreciate it. Just come on, exactly.
We appreciate it.
And let's see. And of course, big thanks to the Music Business Association, Bandzoogle, Hypebot, Bands in Town. We really appreciate all of the participation from the folks that helped put it together. So Jay and I could not do it without them at all. So on that note, we do want to thank everyone for listening. Have a great week, everyone. And we will be back next time on the Your Morning Coffee podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.